Hello, good morning, good afternoon. I'm Brian Lockard. I want to thank you for coming to the Contino webinar on how to adapt your transformation during the pandemic. Just some general housekeeping. All participants are on mute, but if you do have questions during the webinar, please use the question feature. Time permitting, we'll answer any questions that come in. If we have some questions that we do not get to, and we have an opportunity to answer post the webinar, we'll make sure that we get those answers documented and shared with any of the attendees. So first and foremost, I just want to thank everyone for carving a little bit of time out of their day. By way of introduction, I'm Ryan Lockard, as I said. You can find me on Twitter and on LinkedIn. Tend to share quite a bit of content. By nature of my job, I'm a Senior Vice President for Contino based out of the US region, and pretty much have responsibilities attached to delivery oversight as well as helping the Contino sales team to find the right problem solution fit and really just interface with the market to make sure that our services and our offerings are aligned to what we're hearing from the customers. Joining me today from Contino is my good friend Cheryl, and I'll let Cheryl introduce herself.
Hey everybody, I'm Cheryl Hammond. I'm an account principal here at Contino. What that means is I'm responsible for the delivery leadership of our engagements directly with our clients. I've been some kind of consultant for more than a decade now and worked with hundreds of clients in highly regulated industries, including fintech, which we're going to focus on today, healthcare, defense, tons of stuff. So I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation, especially to talk about how the changes in how we work and the changes of technology that were affected by the pandemic and how those impact especially highly regulated industries, pushing them to do things that they used to say they couldn't do. But now that we really have no choice, we have to get a lot more creative. So I think that's going to be a fun conversation. I'm looking forward to it. And thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks, Cheryl. So just by way of introduction for Contino, we are a technology consultancy that focuses basically at the intersection of technology and the business itself. So a lot of our work anchors itself on a business case and making sure that we're proving ROI for the customers that we're working with. We've grown as a business. My early days, about 3 years ago with the company, we were under 100 folks. We've now grown at least 4x from where we started when I joined. Depending on where you're dialing in from, we likely have a regional office not too far from you. We operate out of APAC with 2 offices in Australia, our EMEA headquarters in London, and then in the US we have offices in New York and Atlanta. And even Cheryl is up nice and early because she's a representative of our West Coast contingent over in Seattle. You can see by the nature of some of the logos on the screen that we tend to focus only on the largest, most heavily regulated enterprises. Ben and Dave, when they introduce themselves, are representatives of how regulated enterprises can leverage DevOps, cloud, and digital transformation to accelerate the agenda both of the technology group and the business itself. So without further ado, I'm both excited and frankly a little scared to introduce my buddy Ben. By title, he's the VP of Bank Solutions for a little company called Fiserv. Known Ben for quite a while and really just taken back by how he motivates and how he drives transformation, leveraging storytelling and just the power of influence over people and teams. So Ben, why don't you say hello and just a little introduction into what you're working on these days.
Thanks, Ryan. Though I think we need to update that sticker to be my COVID version because the beard is now been added, and I work for Fiserv, and it is a mosaic of highly regulated, huge amounts of controls, just constantly looking to slow down change. And then I'm the lucky one that tries to shift the culture of that organization to something that will embrace change, embrace digital transformation, and embraced a lot of these kind of modern crazy ideas. And I've been out here for 3 years at Fiserv, and it's slowly starting to gain a lot of momentum. And I have been extremely busy ever since the shift in COVID, because all of my crazy ideas, they're starting to realize, Ben is onto something. So I look forward to hearing those more today.
And Ben, for anyone that may not be familiar with Fiserv, just from the name, Financial Services Technology Group, you guys have oodles of employees. I couldn't even fathom a guess. You are rough order of magnitude.
Yeah, we have over 40,000 associates that work for us, and then about a third of the banks in the U.S. use one of our products from the banking side. And then since we recently merged with First Data, you probably have one of our credit cards in your wallet. So we have touched most people in the U.S. and a good touch in the world.
Perfect. Thanks, Billy. And last and certainly not least is Dave Hoag. Dave has been a friend for a couple years now. Again, titles driving the conversation right now. Dave is the Chief Information Officer for the Options Clearing Corporation. Dave's really been tip of spear at just bending the culture and and progressing the agenda for the OCC to really mature the ways of working and truly transform the operating patterns and the operating model of that organization. Dave, just a little more insight into you, into the role, and into what you're trying to accomplish with the OCC these days.
Sure. So everything we do with OCC, we are a systemically important financial market utility. And so what that means is if we go down, the knock-on effect is systemically high, that other organizations would have financial distress. So, naturally, the regulators are very interested in how we do things and how we protect this global ecosystem. So resiliency is at the core of all the decisions that I make and at the core of our transformation. I think what's counterintuitive to some folks is that we achieve resiliency through our agility, through our DevOps, through our cloud platform initiatives. This is how we're going to strengthen our position and better serve the market participants. So, one, it was telling that story and connecting the dots to, going to the cloud and adopting agile practices is actually going to improve our situation for our customers, as opposed to this idea that, by controlling our own data center and controlling our own servers, we're actually better off. Making that case and demonstrating that this approach is going to strengthen our position was probably the first task I had in our transformation. We're now a year and a half into, I'd say, a 3-year transformation. And a part of this is a technology lift, right? We didn't do a lift and shift of our existing technologies. We're rewriting for cloud native type applications. And I say cloud native, but I use that very loosely in this term, in this context. But it's so much more than just changing your technology stack, right? It changes how we prioritize work internally. It changes how we collaborate with our business partners. It changes how we organize projects, what we think of milestones and deadlines and deliverables, and really addressing all aspects about how we manage the organization. So, a transformation isn't just about buying some new technology or building some new capability. It's about really changing how we work at the organization.
And I just want to point out, like when Dave started, he mentioned being a significantly important market-facing utility. That's SIFMU, if you've ever heard that term. And to hear the CIO of a SIFMU organization talk about DevOps, talk about cloud, talk about achieving business outcomes, leveraging the technologies that a lot of us, engineering-based folks care about, is meaningful, right? A lot of organizations think they have regulation. When you have to report up to Congress the incidents that you have and the changes that you make, it adds another wrinkle of compliance that I think few people have ever had the I'm gonna go with the word pleasure to enjoy.
Sure.
All right, and just again, functionally, the the thing that the OCC is likely most known for, Dave, is pretty much all options traded in the US market are cleared by your organization and your technology, correct?
That's correct. So we support 17 different futures and options exchange around the US. I bet the lion's share of the business is equity derivatives, specifically put and call options. I think people are generally familiar with buying puts or buying calls as part of a risk management strategy. So, every put and call that's traded around the US ultimately goes through our systems, and we ensure and guarantee the performance of those contracts. So when you trade a put or call, you don't worry that in 3 months, 6 months, or in a case of a leap, 2 years later, that you're going to be able to exercise that put and call. We're the ones who guarantee the performance of those contracts.
Awesome. Right. So let's hop into the conversation here. And I think, Cheryl, I'm going to ask you the question first, and then we'll open it up to Dave and Ben. But this whole webinar anchors around two main concepts, one being transformation, the other being the COVID pandemic. While I think the COVID pandemic is pretty ubiquitously understood and defined, oftentimes when I find myself in a conversation with others about transformation, I realize that my definition and their definition don't perfectly align. So rather than spend the next 45 minutes talking about something that we do not have a shared definition of, Cheryl, do you mind just kind of tossing out what your definition of the word transformation means as it relates to regulated enterprises? Oh, no.
No, I'm good. I got to key off of what Dave said, because I think he really captured that the idea of that transformation is not some optional, nice to have thing that makes work more pleasant for employees. It tends to have that side effect. And a lot of folks in Agile transformation will talk about making processes more humane, which is super important. But the driving force behind that and what gets big companies to invest the time and cost of a digital transformation is it's driven by concrete business needs, right? There is really, we understand now that there is no planet on which manual testing is better for a regulated enterprise than highly automated testing and continuous integration and delivery pipelines. Like, we get that now. That is a known thing. And I think we've had the experience. I've worked at a company that ran its own data center and took pride in its own data center until a problem happened and the data center went down and the entire enterprise was out, for 24 hours, and it was at incredible cost, as opposed to something where you've distributed that risk, right? And you've taken concrete steps to make sure that something like the risk of an outage has been virtually eliminated, mitigated at least, right? If you go down, it means the entire globe's gone down and the world's got more significant problems than just your company. And that's helpful because the market then knows that and they know it wasn't you. So I think there's a lot behind DevOps that was always about what is better for the business. It's not, you were talking about, it's not about keeping engineers happy for the sake of being happy. The truth is, those engineers have been screaming about DevOps for all these years because they understood it was a better way to get the work done. And we are now in the benefit of, especially now with, when critical events happen globally, it really shines a light on some of those opportunities. I know, Ryan, you've told me about a client that we have who still run their own data center. And when COVID occurred and everything got shut down in the state where their data center is located, literally the SVP cannot physically go to the data center. Not allowed to get in there, right? So people who need to go in to do maintenance tasks had difficulty accessing their own data centers when that was not an issue for enterprises that have moved to cloud. And it really highlighted what some of those risks were and how a lot of these transformation efforts, whether it be cloud or pipelines or testing, really do lend themselves to the kind of business resiliency that we're seeing a need for right now.
Right. So, Ben, when I should probably set this up a little differently, but I remember sitting in a bar with you in Alpharetta, Georgia, after hours one day, and we're going back and forth talking about transformation. And the one thing that we kept talking about was how do we get the business bought in, right? And I think that's sort of one of those force multipliers of driving change, so that as technologists, we oftentimes feel like the business doesn't care about the tech. And other times the business, putting the other shoe on, the business looks at technology as a cost center that's expensive and has chronically under-delivered. So closing that chasm is pretty critical in actually getting the shared agenda progressed. So can you just punch in a little bit on, closing that divide between the business and the technology, and why it matters so much to have business buy-in to move things forward in this transformation story?
Yeah, when I started at Fiserv, the technology team and the product team were just at each other's throats. They were two different silos. They didn't have shared outcomes. They didn't talk anything. If I talked about the importance of an engineering culture and the importance of DevOps and agility at that particular time, it would have flown completely over their head. I had to address the problems that they were having, and they had things that were failing, things that weren't working, and they said, we'll try anything. And so my team jumped in. We started using some of these things. We didn't even call it Agile. We didn't even call it DevOps. We didn't talk about it. We were just, let's talk about the problem you're having with your customers and how do we make things work better. And then we slowly started layering in my team's bags of tricks. And then all of a sudden, they started to realize they don't have a technology problem, they have other problems. We started to push the problem further up the value stream and start to see there's a problem in this the overarching strategy. There's problems in other areas. As we started pushing that upstream, more and more buy-in came in. And now the head of our business group, the Bank Solutions Group, is constantly asking me, Ben, I need more of what you're doing. How do we scale it? How do we do this more? Whatever your magic is, I don't care. I want more of it, more and more and more, because that success that we had on a small level, it slowly built that consensus to keep doing the next thing and next thing and next thing. So just start really, really, really small, build that value, and then they'll follow all your crazy ideas.
I think the other thing that was kind of an important milestone in your story was, I remember myself, you, and Andrew were sitting in a meeting room down there in your Atlanta office, and we drew on a value stream map. And what we did was we indexed hard on the actual dollars and cents either saved or more quickly realized. And that conversation shifting from, oh, you know what's really cool? Jenkins is really cool, or Kubernetes is really cool. And we shifted the lens to put on the persona of the business user, the product owner, and say, okay, why should I care? And we've converted that conversation from a tools conversation to a financial conversation, saying we've optimized your stream of return by this percentage or by this many dollars. And it's one of those things that oftentimes we isn't in the front of our brain, again, as technologists, but is literally it's sort of the keystone or the Rosetta Stone to better communication with our business partners. Just an observation. Do you remember that sitting in that room whiteboarding out the value stream map?
Oh, there's so many times you and I have been whiteboarding together. But yeah, I remember that. Remember that day. We and I think you're right. The thing that our business leaders care about is around cost. Our organizations are ultimately driven by CEOs that are thinking about the accounting side. The language that they think of is around dollars and cents. And if you can either increase revenue by doing these things or save costs by doing things, they'll invest. So that's the language that they understand. You always have to use the language of the individuals that they understand. The engineers, the developers, they're the easy part. All these things they've known for decades work. How do you convince the leaders? How do you convince the CIOs? How do you convince the other people that are influencing the budgets? That's the next thing. And they think like accountants because they have to.
There's definitely some narrator bias going on with both you and I, as we say the engineers are the easy part, because most product or finance people that I've known in my career would be tearing their hair out saying, no, they're not. They're not thinking about the right thing. So again, we're coming from our position, which is definitely got a little skewing to it.
Well, and I have an
Dave,
engineering background too, and I'm thinking about how like learning how to think in dollar signs was not intuitive for me as an engineer coming up. And when I figured out that that's the language that is so influential and helps you get the things done that you've wanted to get done all along, like teaching engineers to think in terms of dollars and helping them to explain and also to make those trade-offs makes you an unstoppable force, I think.
yeah, and Dave, when you have a very significant investment project going on in your organization now, and when I think about the way that was structured, there was an intentional leadership decision made that this is not a business-driven project. This is not a technology-driven project. It's a two in a box. It's project and technology, product and technology together own the direction, the success, and the failure of that large program. Correct?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no, there are a few handful of folks who are broad generalists who might understand and have the full adaptive domain, but the reality is we're stronger together. I hate to recharacterize that, to reuse that, because the business folks, they're tuned to the customers. They're interfacing day in and day out. They've got insights and observations that the folks on the technology side don't have. And conversely, the folks on the technology side, they might understand the products. And really, I always say the job of the technologist is to explain the art of the possible, and bring the ideas and the innovation to the business users who are looking at the problems that we need to solve, but don't necessarily know all the tools in the toolbox that they can apply to address those problems. And so the marrying of those two together is really critical, because one has the domain expertise about the problems, the customers, the third parties that we are interfacing with. The other has the understanding of the solutions that are available in the universe of what can possibly be done. And together they end up delivering the highest value for our participants.
So then I think we have a pretty good now shared definition of what transformation means and some lower level tactics of how we address it. It should be no surprise to anybody globally that we're being affected now by a pandemic that's done a number on the economy, obviously on the world health, and significant effect on the ways of working. Organizations that traditionally enjoyed some degree of co-location are now being forced to create new team norms and create new interface models. And Cheryl was talking about the SVP or the CTO that wasn't allowed into a data center. Like there are new physical constraints that have never really been realized at this scale or breadth in our industry before. So with that said, I guess, Dave, I'm going to start with you on this. How has the pandemic affected the work that your team is doing, your team itself, and sort of, I guess, the way that you're looking at your 2020 objectives and goals?
Yeah, so go back to one of the benefits of being a SIFMU is we really drive resiliency inside and out, on a regular basis. And so, before the pandemic, we were fortunate. We did actually a business continuity exercise on pandemic preparedness. So, we certainly had no idea this was coming down the line, but you look at the universe of business events you might want to deal with. A tornado hitting a data center is one of them, but pandemic is another. So, so we actually had just recently completed some pandemic training, which set us up well. In addition to that, we do twice a year work from home exercises. So we evaluate our technology and make sure that it was well suited and people are equipped to be able to work remotely. And so for a lot of just, I'd say, good practices that we had put in place, we were well prepared for it. With that said, organizationally, there was a lot that we had to think and act differently on from when I joined a couple of years ago from where we are today. Most notably, an emphasis on your internal tools and capabilities, right? So a lot of times we focus on the product that we need to deliver for our clients, in our case, the clearing of options on a day in and day out basis and the risk management of those. But I also recognized that how do people collaborate? Are they equipped to share information effectively? Is work transparent and trackable over time? Not from a perspective of micromanagement to see what people are working on, but rather to create visibility to what everybody's working on so we can help each other achieve whatever the outcomes are that we're trying to realize. And so investments we made in terms of rolling out workflow tools to support our agile practices, shared whiteboards, shared technology for documenting information so that way we can exchange ideas and make them persistent beyond the people who were in the meeting at the time. The introduction of tools that provide chat-like functionality for collaboration and sharing of information. All those were things we were doing that were the right to drive up productivity of the organization and make us a more collaborative, effective organization. Also turned out to be super helpful when everybody's working remotely from home. So, we were well positioned at the time of the work from home to kind of just step right into execution. And so we actually saw a surge initially in productivity and throughput when everybody started working from home. Who knows why? I could speculate a little bit that all of a sudden you're not in meetings 24/7 and you don't have 2 hours of commuting on each end of the day. So I think these things certainly helped us drive productivity gains, but you also have very clear pipelines of work. You knew what needed to be done. We have the build practices in place to, when you commit, it flows into the cycle. You get the feedback loops right away. So our practices really enabled folks to be heads down and deliver. Fast forward to today, I'd say we still have good productivity, but I do observe a challenge that's emerging in a persistent work from home environment. And that's more some of the ideation and creative problem solving. You talked earlier about you and Ben sitting in front of a whiteboard drafting something out. That I have not found a good substitute for that level of interaction, that rapid ideation on a problem and solution scope, right? You can have structured dialogue and prepared dialogue, but that sort of, in the moment flow has been difficult for us to realize. So some of the problem solving and planning for future work is where I feel that we're starting to feel the pinch of some of this work from home environment.
And in those whiteboarding sessions, it's not just the synchronous versus asynchronous interaction. There's some infectious energy that gets built when 2 or more people are in the room together and they're uncovering novel ideas, or they're overcoming what were once difficult objections to handle, right? And you don't really get that over video. You really don't get that over the phone, or at least that's my experience, in my opinion. I guess turning that then back to you, Ben. Is there anything that you thought at the beginning of the year in January, when the COVID was a thing, we were aware of it, but it just had not hit the soil yet here in the States? Were there things that you believed you were going to accomplish in 2020 that now, a little better than halfway through the year, you're looking at the reality of what can be accomplished because of the pandemic and the effects that are just, not on the table anymore?
So I learned a lot of my tricks. I lived in Minneapolis for 7 years, and so I learned a lot of my tricks around planning things using these things, all different sides of them. And so my entire plan for the year of what we're going to do are a series of Post-it notes that are in my office, in the office in Alpharetta, that I have not been able to see since March. So I only had a physical plan for everything that I needed to do, because up until that point, up until they closed down the office and only they had people that had to be in the office, I'm a road warrior. I can work anywhere. Most of my team are road warriors. They can work anywhere. My entire plan had to be completely rethought of because the needs of our organization changed. And so I think there's nothing better than, and as the agile guy, to have to do kind of agile planning in the middle when certain things, certain events in life have to completely scrap things out. And so I've tried to supplement my my love for Post-it notes by using Miro and kind of other tools. They're okay. I agree, it's not the same way. I miss the sessions we would have. Frequent sessions with my team. I would travel all over the place and do this sitting around whiteboards with a team trying to figure out problems we're having to do all of those virtual. And to come up with new things to do, it's slower, it's harder to do. It takes more time to kind of build up the momentum now on things that we're trying to do. Now my bosses and grand bosses, they still want to try to get all those things accomplished, so I'm trying to be creative about it. But there is a different clip for new work now that we have to figure out, because I don't see that I'll be able to see that board anytime soon that's in my office in Alpharetta.
Right. And a lot of times when we talk about roadmaps, we're talking about either feature-driven roadmaps or project-driven roadmaps. One of the things that sort of has come up, and Cheryl, I'm going to ask you for your thoughts on this, is the idea of the importance of capabilities, right? One of the things that makes humans unique is our ability to communicate. One of the things that humans struggle with the most is the ability to communicate. And communication as a capability and interaction as a capability are hypercritical in this distributed time. And where I'm headed with this is, are there new capabilities or are there emerging capabilities that the pandemic is bringing more of a focus to that should be indexed on harder as we're talking about what our goals are for 2020 and 2021, that were not as prominent pre-pandemic, tongue twister for the morning. Cheryl, I'm kind of curious, like from a capability stance, what are you seeing as a driver for effectiveness in this current state?
I think one of the things that was a game changer in a way that people did not expect is the equalizing force of everybody being remote, right? There is a massive difference between we're all little boxes on the screen and we're all in the same situation compared to what we used to do, which was a tiny, terrible microphone in the middle of a giant conference room and somebody's oversized head on the screen over there, but we're never looking at them. And, oh, I'll just point the laptop at the whiteboard. You can see that, right? You know, and so what that's now done is, see, I agree. I used to have a tremendous bias towards, I want to go physically travel and be with the client where they are. And I was discovering even in recent times that where the client is not always one place anymore either. And so now that we have this idea of, hey, if one person's remote and everybody's remote, we're now having to work together to find the tools, but on equal footing. So it's not a bunch of people that it's working well for and somebody off in their home office for reasons. So I think that is a capability that's really improved. I think it has pushed a lot of organizations. What I hear these guys saying is that their orgs were leading in this effort, but I know that a lot of folks listening are having that experience of, my company was against having a VPN, was opposed to supporting a remote workforce, was really locked down on the nature of devices that they would allow to connect. And I think that ability to support a distributed workforce, we've talked with clients who have never allowed people to work from home or access things from remote, who now had no choice, had to do it to get the business up and running. That is going to unlock abilities in terms of hiring, in terms of how they support their people, in terms of what their people can work on. I loved both Dave and Ben's insight that there are roles and there's functions where that uninterrupted work time for some people in some roles is what they've been begging for their entire careers. So they're delighted, right? And it's, so how do we balance? So now we're kind of hyper indexing on that, like, ability to be heads down, have uninterrupted time, be that kind of productive. We're seeing productivity gains from that, and then balancing that with that desire to collaborate. But the collaboration and the push to new tools, I think, is going to help us learn how to do that better.
Perfect. Dave, anything that you would add to that as far as what areas of capabilities are more in the front of your brain these days than they may have been prior?
Well, I mean, I do think it's this ideation and problem solving aspect. I mean, it to Ben's point, you know, everyone's expecting the same velocity and throughput, and for the work that was already well queued up, I mean, we're seeing it. And like I said, we're even seeing acceleration. It's really now that next round, that next phase of problem solving, doing cross product team integrated plan development, right? That's not a trivial exercise. And so we're trying different mechanisms to have breakout rooms and leverage Slack and do, trying different ways to try to make that process effective. And I don't know that we've nailed that yet. But, I think as we keep exercising that muscle, I think the interesting problem that's ahead of us, though, is the return to work challenge. And the reason I say this is Cheryl just sort of hit on it, right? Is if you end up with a phased return to work, you got half your staff coming in because you want to keep socially distant, and how do you handle a conference call? Do people get into a room together and have half the group remote, which puts them at a different level of interaction than the 6 people who are in the room? Do you have people queued up outside that conference room that enter the conference room as soon as it ends? Do you, how are we going to adapt to a mixed mode of remote? Before we had 90% of people in the office and the one poor guy who was dialing in. Now we have everybody remote, and so we're all on equal footing. And as we try to phase people back in, we're naturally going to create a disparate nature of interaction. And I'm not sure we have a good tools or handle on how we're going to address that situation moving forward. So, maybe that's the capability that we've got to figure out. The next step.
The conversation that we've been having in our organization around that front is having half our team be in the office and have to wear masks because we're at a phased approach, and the other half at home seems silly. If everyone can be home safely, we can collaborate together on equal footing, not to the point that it reaches that everyone can be in together. It just doesn't make any sense. And so we're going to hold to the point that we can go towards having full collaboration to open our offices, but we're even questioning, when do we need offices and when do we not? In certain roles that are highly collaborative, very strategic, it makes sense to have them centered in certain areas. And other roles, if you're constantly on the road, you're in sales, you're constantly working with clients and other things, maybe it's better that you work remote. And there's a completely different dialogue now around it, because we had to push out persistent chat across 40,000 people in a few days. We had to go from, I was lucky, I was one of the technology people that had VPN, that had a laptop. We had to push out 20,000 VMs so that the people that had never worked remote, it's amazing what our technology team has been able to do in such a short amount of time. And now the danger of that capability has been unlocked. Now our CEO asked the question, why can't we tackle the next problem and the next problem? In a few short days, we were able to do things that seemed impossible. What's the next impossible thing that has now been able to unlock because of this?
That's amazing. That's a powerful statement right there. That's awesome. So you both work in financial services, David and Ben. You guys are honestly probably 2 of the most regulated customers I've worked with, right? To what degree is the impact of that regulation on this now heightened sense of distribution that we have across the organization, as we focus on things like DevOps in the cloud, which inherently have been given an eyebrow lift by the regulators, by the auditors, by the compliance and security teams. Like, excuse me, you want to automate the way that we're progressing builds, not only to pre-production but also to production. What level of impact has that had on you guys, both prior to and during this pandemic state that we're in? Ben, I'll start with you if you don't mind. Just kind of like touch on how the regulators are affecting the way that you guys are going about work and the ways of working you're following.
So being that we're financial services and being that we've had all of these programs like the PPP program, trying to get loans to small businesses, et cetera, what we had to do is we had to rapidly build an application that would satisfy our compliance and regulations so that we could sell it to banks that want to participate in the PPP program. We did that whole thing in a few weeks go from, we had no requirements, we had nothing. We essentially, we knew the APIs for the SBA, and we just started building things, and we had leadership, our compliance teams, everyone that was part of it. And we were able to get something delivered in normally what would have taken months and months to years. We did in a few minutes. How do we think about CAB approvals? How do we think about things that can work in an automated fashion? Because they had to. All of those things that we held on to had to be let go, because there's no possible way that we could do and wait 3 days till the next scheduled review to go through the plan. We needed to deploy that night. How can we satisfy that at that type of ludicrous speed? And it's you can start to see this ripple effect that's happening now in our organization because of that one program. We accomplished that by an executive fire drill of just pushing. How do we make that sort of way of working sustainable so that we can always operate that way? And that wrinkle is starting getting into more and more executives, that model is used over and over. Let's do it like SBA. Let's do it SBA. Let's do it SBA. Which is why I'm so freaking busy, because they keep saying Ben's team knows how to do it. Let's tie into Ben's team to do things like SBA. And so it's just nutty on the amount of change has started been opening up just because of that capability that has been unlocked.
Honest to God, I hope whoever was on that team to build out that functionality in the breakneck speed that they did are proud of the work they did. Like, those are the stories that kind of fuel people like us to just keep pressing in those times of adversity. That's awesome. I love hearing that. Dave, how about with you? How are you handling the hand of the regulators as they're looking at your push towards the cloud and towards further automation in the way that you're delivering the business value today?
Yes. So, you got to start back and understand, regulators are coming from a position of making sure that we are resilient, that we continue to serve in our market function, and we protect the global economy. So that's kind of where their origin philosophy, and so their push is reasonable, because they are challenging you to be the best that you could be, and they are intelligent enough that when they passed the Reg SCI rules, there's a little call out there that it says, basically you need to be aligned to industry best practices. So we're not going to tell you how to do it, but we'll tell you that, you have to have some way that you can tie out what you do to industry best practices. And so, that really creates a broad universe for ways that you solution problems. And certainly the easiest way is, very labor and manual intensive, put people and processes in place where somebody's checking and reviewing things and you're filing papers, et cetera, right? And this is, not too dissimilar to maybe, think QA testing, 15 years ago, right? And the manual testing is easy to do. You write down a script, you repeat the process. That was kind of the mindset. And the same holds true for a lot of the regulations and security controls and everything else we have in place. With the advent of the cloud, we're able to move a lot of practices away from manual to automated. We are able to look at our environmental configurations through the Terraform scripts and scan them for security vulnerabilities. In the past, you might have all these bespoke snowflakes of Linux servers everywhere that have their own unique configurations. You don't have a prayer of being able to analyze those if there's a security risk associated with those. And so the point that I make routinely with the regulators is that by moving to the cloud, by moving to infrastructure as code, and being dogmatic about eliminating manual practices, no one logging into servers and making tweaks post deployments with how it works, right? Having some principles in place that are bright white lines that you do not cross. By having those things in place, we're going to improve our resiliency, strengthen our regulatory posture, create better auditability and traceability of end-to-end solutions. So we win on the regulator front on all levels. Never mind that we're also accelerating time to market, lowering costs, and delivering business value for our folks as well. And so while this is something that might resonate with everybody on this call, it'd be fair to say that there is an ongoing dialogue that we have with the regulators where we talk through, this is how we're designing things to achieve these outcomes. This is why the bright lines are being drawn where they're being drawn and what the implications are. And so you have to go into it with a very partnership and open dialogue with the regulators so that they understand that I'm not doing this because I'm trying to save $5 and putting the market at risk. I'm doing this because I'm actually trying to protect the market and make us a better organization in the long run.
But you're that special kind of dangerous that you actually read the regulation. You do not just accept the same key controls that we had in place last year are still good this year. To be honest, like to be able to play the game, you have to read the rules of the game. You don't just accept the patterns that existed before you. And I think that's the that's the key takeaway from what I heard you say there is you read the regulation. The regulation says you have to do this. It doesn't say how to do that, right?
That's correct. That's right. And again, sometimes it's hard because the easy path is always hire another team to do something, to look at some paper, to do a checkbox, right? That is always the easy path. You got to be creative. You got to think through it. You got to design your processes and then the supporting automation underneath it. And sometimes maybe that's a business process automation. Maybe sometimes it's a workflow tool. Maybe sometimes it's a third-party library that scans your code for open source vulnerabilities, right? So, but it takes some work. But with that work, you get compounding returns that affect and improve your productivity from now and forever.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite LinkedIn memes is the one that says, the most dangerous words in business today is we've always done it this way, right? Like that is, people that accept that generally do not get along well with me.
I wanted to highlight something Dave said that I thought was really good and that I think is not always acknowledged, which is that at the heart of it, Agile and the Lean Startup and DevOps are all aggressive risk management practices.
Yes.
They are meant to reduce risk. And they're frequently not seen that way, but the whole point is that those small iterations, when when I was consulting in a big financial company, we were told the phrase safe to fail as a coach was not a safe phrase to use because it had the word fail in it. And so we had to adapt that because it was just such a scary thing to talk about. But the whole idea of you want the places that inevitably fail to be smaller, less expensive. You want to find them very quickly. You want to automate them away so they never, ever, ever happen again. And all of that's what's enabled by these practices. And I love hearing Dave at the level that you're at in the organization, taking the lead with that messaging to say, this is to make us a more regulatorily compliant or enterprise, right? Yeah. This enhances that. It doesn't in any way take away from it. And the idea of like, slow is smooth and smooth is fast, that you're doing these little things so that as a whole organization you can speed up and do things a lot more quickly overall.
That's one of my favorite quotes, Cheryl. And I completely agree that we've seen the same thing as we get our compliance and audit and regulation team to understand what we're doing. They end up being our biggest advocates because then they start to see these big, slow, overarching, process-heavy ways of delivering work are actually more risky because these other more leaner, lightweight, transparent, consistent ways of working that are automated are better, and then they start pushing more and more. And we've had examples of individuals in our org that then are pushing. We need to go faster. These big releases are dangerous. We need to stop doing it. And when you can convince your audit and compliance and security folks to start thinking that, like, it's like the sun comes down from the heavens and it just starts to shift. But it takes a while. You got to win them over to start to see that it is a safer way.
Cheryl, thank you for calling that out. I heard it too, and that's something we don't celebrate nearly enough is the actual intent behind these things. It's exactly as you guys summarized. So I think we have about time for one wrap-up question here. And we spent the lion's share of this conversation, looking back and talking about what we've done and what we're doing now. But let's turn our gaze forward and try to be, you know, the almighty futurist that we all one day want to be, and try to predict what's coming down the pike. And Dave, I'll start with you if you don't mind. Where are you starting to see momentum for 2021? And if you want to lean on the technology side and say, you know, data, AI, ML, IoT, things like that, or even you know, automation, RPA, or if you want to talk more about the business side, that's cool too. But just given what we know now and what we've experienced in these last 4 months of the pandemic, what do you kind of see the future being in the regulated financial services space?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'd say, you know, I just briefly touch on, you know, our business. You know, I think that, you know, the reason derivatives exist is risk management. Risk management has been proven to be an important element of anybody's portfolio. And so I'm excited about future products that are out to help the typical investors effectively manage the risk of their investments. So I think that that's going to see more derivatives and more uptake in futures and options, and I'm excited about that business side of our outcome. Now, focusing internally a bit on the technology side, you know, we're heavy into automation and eliminating manual practices for all the reasons we already talked about. You know, I think the part that will be you know, next steps for us is there's two major areas. First is it starts with the data. If you don't have good data governance in place, you don't have good data quality, you don't have the mechanisms to measure and track your data quality over time, you don't have good semantic definitions that are generally accepted across the organization, I think that, you know, you're going to be struggled to do any of the next steps of technology adoption. So ML, for example, is only good if I've got good data feeding into ML, you know, and so data quality and data governance and making sure you have strong data governance program is really critical. And I don't mean information governance like, you know, classification and records retention. I'm talking specifically on the data quality side, the data lineage, like how we know this value came from that value and whether the transformations it went through, and how do I know that the quality and integrity of that data was preserved throughout all those transformations? You know, that's the data governance I'm talking about. And with that, you now open your world to, you know, APIs, right? So why do we have reports? Why do we have screens at all? You know, for the business I'm in, you know, nobody should ever have to log into a screen. It should all be computer to computer talking. But we need to go to an API-driven world. You've already seen this in, you know, a lot of the tools that have been widely successful today are because they're open and they provide APIs for people to interoperate it and plug it into their environment. Well, that's the same thing we need to do as part of our ecosystem, is move away from the user side of things, the people side, and more to the system side to streamline those practices over time. Final thoughts are, you know, ML is going to be an interesting one. We are in the risk management business. You know, we keep track of who has what positions in portfolios to make sure that, you know, the contracts can be performed and lived up to 2 years from now. And we do that through effective risk management practices. Today, we do a model development that takes lots of researchers and time and back testing and studies, and we prove it out. We have a big white paper that's written up that describes how all those things work. And imagine an ML world if you trained a machine and they ended up with better coverage ratios over time historically, but you don't have a white paper that can explain why it works. Mm-hmm. That will be a challenge, I think, for the regulators, a challenge for our industry to get comfortable with a model or a machine that learned from a data set, but you don't really know why it actually produces the right answer. And you can't explain it in a white paper, and you can't tie it out to the theoretical underpinnings other than the fact that, hey, I looked at history and this is what history said we should do. It's
that transfer of control fear, right?
That's right.
Machine won't do what we tell it to because we told it not to.
Well, it's the Tesla unfortunately hitting the white truck crossing the road. You know, it's Tesla's good most of the time. Why did it make the decision that it doesn't detect the white truck? You know, we don't know, right? And so that's the fear that's, I think, might hold back some more broader adoption of ML in a business like mine, you know, there might be consumer products where it fits well, but in a business like mine, that's going to be the resistance that I have to cross.
So Dave mentioned the use of APIs and open systems, and I think in the US, we're actually a little bit behind both Europe and Asia with the use of open banking, API-driven transactions, and that whole emergent technology that seems to be fueling a lot of the card processing and the transactions that run those two continents. So I'm kind of curious, Ben, if I time box it to about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes, when you look forward, do you see things like open banking or API-driven transactions as the next technical step, or are you also thinking that AI and ML are going to be paving the road for you ahead?
So a lot of the banks that we work with, they were barely dipping their toe into any sort of digital transformation before the pandemic hit. Now they all have accelerated in 3-4 months that they've been talking about for years. The amount of just focus on digital transformation across the board is absolutely insane. And it ties into what Dave's talking about APIs and data government, machine, like the kind of intertwining of businesses that are going to come. Digital products are winning over and over and over again. And you need to look at it today. Like, how often are you spending time watching Netflix in your free time, or Disney Plus, or Amazon Prime? My friends in India are saying how much digital currency has just shot through the roof with everything that's going on. And I'm seeing the same things. Everything that is digital, is going to be the way that we do things. The companies that have APIs that can intertwine themselves with other businesses, they're going to win. And that's going to drive more and more behavior. We're seeing it internally in terms of sales that we're getting. More and more of our sales are about intertwining businesses together, because that's the way that how can we create unique creative products by taking this company, and this company, and combining together and build a product ecosystem. It's just going to get a beautiful, beautiful mess. So if you like to build APIs, you like data, it's going to be a heyday. And if you like to change things, you're going to be very busy for a very long time.
Beautiful, awesome. So I'd be remiss if not to mention if you like the craziness that came from either Ben or Dave, both organizations are actively hiring. So I know that the pandemic has affected folks in different ways. If you find yourself on the job market, or you're not inspired by your organization, you want to work with leaders that are as inspiring as Ben and Dave, and you're lucky enough to be in one of their areas, feel free to hit them both up. Either Ben has provided the HR email of the person to directly get in contact, and for the OCC, all inbound opportunities need to funnel through the careers page. And I'd be further remiss to not point out Contino is also hiring. So if you're inspired to have the opportunity to work with partners as amazing as Ben and Dave, and build out the products and the services of the future, and really just help uplift the capability of teams in the world of cloud or DevOps, please feel free to either reach out to us through our email, our website, or honestly hit me or Cheryl up directly. We're available on LinkedIn. We're both available on Twitter. I'm happy to share my insights of my career journey and why I'm proud of where I work. Last but not least, we have another upcoming webinar on how to build your own cloud migration playbook. It's August 19th, and you can register for that today. And I think there are a few more upcoming webinars as we're bringing the summer of Contino CloudFest to a close in the near future. If you hung in there for the full hour, which shockingly a lot of folks did, I appreciate you for coming along. Any feedback, either positive or negative, I tend to love hate mail. Feel free to send it in. And if there's anything we can do to improve or further this content, please share it. But for myself and the rest of the panelists, thank you so much for your time today.